2007, my father passes away, and one of the first calls I get is from then Chief Minister Modi.
Are you the most hated journalist in the country right now?
This is the second person who's asking me this question, so obviously there is a problem that I have. And every time I would ask her, but now let's talk politics, ma'am. Will Rahul Gandhi succeed you? No, that is a political question.
Your favorite politician?
Now, I wish I could also put Mr. Modi in my list of favorite politicians. Maybe I should. I'd love to do a debate between Mr. Modi and Rahul Gandhi. We can even have two anchors, Arnab Goswami and me, both. I think it would break the internet.
Hello and welcome to this very special conversation. TV anchor, journalist and speaking to us on his new book, The Election That Surprised India, author Rajdeep Sardesai. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Mehak and the team at Brut for having me.
From 1989 to 2024, how have you seen election campaigning perhaps changing? Let's start there first.
Look, I think one of the big interesting changes that has taken place is there was much more tam-jham. In a way, 89, 91, because there were less restrictions in the pre-session era on how many posters you could have, how many banners, the music could go on till late into the night. Over time, various restrictions came in. But even so, I think there's much less tam-jham now. And I think elections are becoming more and more, dare I use the word, almost like a science where managing the last mile connectivity with the voter is very important. I'm not saying it wasn't there in the past. In the past, you had door-to-door campaigns. The door-to-door campaigns have shifted to a WhatsApp near you.
Right.
From a door near you, campaigns are conducted through WhatsApp groups, through call centers, targeting individuals. It's much more competitive in a strange way. But a lot of elections is now about managing the entire environment to ensure that last mile connectivity is. Now you have call centers being set up where you'll have 200 people sitting in a call center in Thane in Maharashtra and then speaking to voters individually, reminding them of the beneficiaries, the benefits they've got, the so-called labharthis. All of this has made it far more professional, I would say.
Right.
You still need the old style politician at times who has the ability to gather a large crowd, speak well, be an effective communicator. But there must be a backup machine. You can't do one without the other now.
Let's talk a little bit about the backup machine. Who are these people who are employed, say, by political parties to do that last mile connectivity? Are they young people? It's a job, so you get it, so you're doing it? Or do you think it's actual ideological? They feel that way towards a political party and hence they want to go that extra mile for it.
It's very interesting what you said because, for example, there is this group which I mentioned in my previous book, Association of a Billion Minds, which is now transformed into Nation with Namo, which I mentioned in this book. And many of them are young professionals, come out of management schools, law schools, getting salaries at times equivalent to what a management graduate may get when he gets into another company. So it's a very corporate-like approach. Whether they do it out of ideological belief or whether they do it simply because they see it as another job is the big question mark. I think it's a mix of both. I think what Narendra Modi did in 2014 when he first came to power is managed to enthuse a lot of young people to get interested in politics once again. And because these young people were not interested in so much of in the organization of rallies or the old style politics, they became data geeks, a lot of data mining, finding out about specific constituencies, booths. Some of them were very good at social media. So how do you spread narratives, use your expertise in that. So do surveys, very, very minute surveys done right down to the last micro level. So all of this is done by professionals who got management degrees. And I think the BJP was a step ahead of their rivals in this regard because they were the first to professionalize and corporatize it. Maybe they've got more money.
Okay.
If you've got more money, Nation with Namo is essentially an in-house agency now for the BJP. And there are others who have emerged. Varahe Analytics is another name. They did a lot of the surveys for the BJP. There's a group called Jarvis, which did a lot of the work in Maharashtra, organizing these call centers. So it is becoming very, very professional and it is run by people with a corporate mindset who may be interested in politics, whether their ideology is driving them in the direction. Maybe at the top, the ideology drives the leaders of the organization. But out there, people are just looking for jobs. These are good jobs to have.
I'm going to come just to the book in just a minute. One question is I want you to go back and jog your memory and share an anecdote with us from a previous election that was surprising, was different.
Well, there are lots of anecdotes over the years. A couple stand out for me. For example, there's a lot of debate now about electronic voting machines and EVMs. I remember covering a Maharashtra election in the early 90s in Bhindi Bazaar, in the heart of Mumbai, where there was a Muslim League candidate pitted against the Shiv Sena. And both sides were trying to stuff the ballot boxes. This was pre-EVMs. There were ballot boxes and all those, it was done by paper ballot. So there were people coming in from all directions, virtually taking over a ballot box. Eventually, our photographs ensured that the election was countermanded.
And this is pre-TV. And this was in Mumbai and Bhindi Bazaar, not a Bihar.
Not a Bihar. This was that. I mean, that's the interesting aspect. It was not Bihar. Bihar, we had heard of a booth capturing. This was ballot boxes being stuffed in the heart of Mumbai. So that's a memory that stays with me. The other memory that stays with me is riding on a chariot with N.T. Ramarao. I mean, I haven't seen anyone, he seemed to believe he was God, or the audience believed he was God. And he was waving to them, with a crown on his head. It was quite something special. And this was later in his life, just before he passed away, a year before he passed away, I think 95 election. But, he was quite a mesmeric personality for his followers, certainly. And there he was, and you realize, what charisma can be in politics. Another memory is when Lalu Prasad won an election in Bihar in 1995, and I was doing an interview with him, and he insisted that the interview must be done in the Gaushala, in the cow shed, and with a cow in the background. And he insisted that I learn how to, take milk out of the cow, to milk a cow. And it was just a reminder that even though he hadn't understood, I would have thought he hadn't understood TV, but he actually understood it perfectly. He knew that cow in the background would be the perfect image for a TV studio. For a TV shoot. There are lots of memories over the years. Each one, Narendra Modi and me doing an interview in Gujarat 2002 when he won. We were in the BJP headquarters, small little room, and people were banging on the door, either because they wanted to greet him or they wanted to target me. And there was this whole, we were struggling to get the interview done because they were, the doors were being banged on. But there was this crazed crowd outside. I remember the first interview that Priyanka Gandhi Vadra did was with us. And we were doing a day in the life of a politician. And one sequence was in the fields in Amethi. She was campaigning for her mother. And lunch was served eventually at 3 or 4. A carpet was laid out in the fields there. And serving us was Sushil Kumar Shinde. In say, Beti, achar lo thoda aur. 2 years or 1 or 2 years later, he became chief minister. I said, I told him afterwards, I think that achar helped. Feeding the Gandhis can't hurt you. So that's another memory that stays in the mind. Lots of memories. When Sonia Gandhi chose not to become the prime minister, I remember we broke the story I was in NDTV at the time. We broke the story. The street was, I was probably the only person apart from a couple of others who was there on the street. Within a couple of hours, the entire street, people were on trees. Just the imagery of that, people hanging on trees because suddenly all roads led to 10 Janpath was quite a moment in politics. And then watching some big leaders being defeated when they think that they're winning is something that stays in my mind, whether over the years. But it's been fun. It's been quite a fun ride.
I'm going to take 1 or 2 threads out of what you said, but before that, how has media changed in the way it covers politicians and politics? Let's say 1989 to now, when you began.
Mehak, I think one thing that is there is that I think the politicians of the previous generation were by and large more accessible. I remember the first election I covered in '89. I could get, VP Singh was at that moment one of the sort of star politicians of the time, contender for prime ministership, very accessible. We could go, we didn't have to sort of rush to seek an appointment. Now access has become far more important because politicians themselves are very picky and choosy about who they will speak to.
But is there like a question mark on access journalism as well, right?
There is a huge question mark on that.
The closer you are to a politician, the more likely you'll carry what they say versus sort of being non-prejudiced, unbiased, putting just the information out there.
Absolutely. What's happened is, it was strange that I think today journalists in general are far more dependent on access journalism than we were 35 years ago, because politicians in general were more accessible, less intolerant, I would say.
Less intolerant.
Less intolerant. A Bal Thackeray, I could criticize him. He would attack me in a public meeting. I had criticized him for the Shiv Sainiks digging up a cricket pitch. But that didn't stop him from speaking to me.
So they were more tolerant then, less intolerant now.
That's right. I think today's politicians are less tolerant. They are unwilling to accept criticism that easily. I think today's politicians divide journalists like they divide every aspect of society into them versus us. I think journalists are far more dependent on access to a politician to get a story. Earlier, it was possible to hit the ground, meet people, and get far more information. Now that old style source generated information is far more difficult to get. People either out of fear or simply because they don't trust journalists, don't want to talk as freely as before. And in general, I think that there is a distancing that, you see, the journalist in the past could be objective because he wasn't, I mean, in general, I didn't see us being players in this political game. I think a lot of journalists over time have, in some form or the other, become part of this politicians are using us far more ruthlessly
now than they did earlier. But you did have journalists becoming politicians earlier as well. I mean, those lines did blur.
Sure, over the years, journalists have always, there was always in every decade, a few journalists have become politicians. But the truth of the matter is, I think there was a distance between the politician and the journalist, and a mutual respect.
Mutual respect.
Let me call it that. Let me say there was a general mutual respect. Journalists did what they had to do. Politicians did what they had to do. Now, the lines get increasingly blurred. The demands on both sides are perhaps greater. You've got to invite a politician to a conclave. So how are you going to say something negative about him or her?
So the economic model of
the business model has changed because you desperately need someone to come to your event, so you may not criticize him. And on the other hand, the politician also knows the weaknesses that journalists may have, and thereby perhaps prey on them. And I think somewhere in recent times, to give another example, when I used to do the big fight on NDTV, we would get the top politicians coming to us in the studio.
Right.
I remember doing a debate between Arun Shauri, Pranab Mukherjee and Kashiram on Ambedkar. I mean, could that be possible today, these three heavyweights coming together for a routine seeming debate? What was once a week is now every day shouting matches, but it means all you have is spokespersons shouting at each other. I think the politicians themselves had more respect for each other. They were willing to, TV was new. I keep giving the example of Narendra Modi once coming to a program of mine at 1 hour's notice because another guest had dropped out.
Right.
I mean, I think about it today. I mean, would that happen? A top politician coming to a TV studio at 1 hour's notice? I think it was new, so it was more exciting from a TV perspective. Today, I think all of us have realized, we just simply seem to use each other when it's convenient. Then there was a greater acceptance of each other. Maybe you call it camaraderie.
I'm going to circle back to that memory that you shared with us, which was with Narendra Modi. And you said the people were banging on the door, either to catch hold of you or congratulate him. Tell us, how did your relationship with him, take us through the decades of your relationship with him, and why has it become what it has become today?
Look, I met Mr. Modi first during a Rath Yatra in 1990. I was a young reporter in the Times of India. He was state secretary, I think, Gujarat of the BJP, but he was in charge of Advani ji's Somnath to Ayodhya Rath Yatra, the Gujarat leg of it. So he was very helpful organizing when press conferences were there with Mr. Modi, you knew that you would have your pens, pads, everything, whatever you wanted available. He even organized a fax machine famously for us in Surat. So he was very much hands-on in those days. And we built some kind of an equation. I speak a bit of Gujarati, Mehak, so that helped me with Mr. Modi. My grandfather was a police officer whom Mr. Modi knew from the 70s. So we built an equation, and then he came to Delhi in the mid-90s. I came here. Television was growing. He was a fine communicator, so we often got him on TV shows. Although once I bypassed him for Pramod Mahajan, and he rang me up to say, I know why you've got Pramod over me, because he speaks better English than me. So there have been moments like that. But 2002, when he went to Gujarat, in fact, the last debate program that Mr. Modi appeared was a big fight program I did a few days after 9/11 on Islamic terrorism. And he starts the program by saying, I commend, मैं Rajdeep Sardesai की हिम्मत को दाद देता हूँ कि he's doing a program on Islamic terror. But that was then. Then he goes next month to Gujarat, becomes chief minister. All is well till the riots happened. During the riots itself, he gives me a couple of interviews, including 2 in one day, because the tape got chewed. So I actually had to go back to his house at midnight to do the second interview. And that's when we were attacked as we were leaving his residence by a mob on the highway. That's another story. But I think that riot and our coverage of it changed our equation. Hopefully not forever, because in 2007, my father passes away, and one of the first calls I get is from then Chief Minister Modi to condole with me.
How long was it you hadn't spoken between that incident?
No, I used to speak, that time when he was Chief Minister, we spoke fairly regularly on the phone. He didn't give me interviews, but we spoke.
Even after the Godhra riots?
Yeah, he gave me an interview in 2012 when he made me sit famously on the footboard of a bus.
Right.
And I think that was the interview where he had made up his mind that I was going to tell Rajdeep what his position in life now was. That he's on the footboard of the bus, I'm on the high seat. And I think that was... And after that also, in the run-up to the 2014 elections, as I mentioned in my 2014 book, we would regularly converse. He would tell me he would want to know from me how I saw the election going, which I thought was interesting. Maybe it suggests one thing that very few people know. Mr. Modi will try and get as many sources of information, and he's a good listener because he was ready to listen to me, and I was happy to talk to him. I'm happy to talk to any politician who wants to talk. So that equation continued till 2014. And then, as I write in my book, when I rang up to congratulate him, he had gone to sleep. And I guess the sleep has lasted for a decade. We met once or twice at some function like a Diwali Milan at the BJP headquarters that I went once to. But by and large, I guess he's in another universe. I'm still the guy on the footboard. He's in the skies.
And in 2007, yet he had gotten in touch with you during that period.
Yes, very much so.
Passed away.
That's right. We did an interview at a Hindustan Times summit, which didn't quite go the way it should have. I think I asked him too many questions on Godhra and Gujarat. He expected it to be much more about center-state relations. That's the way it is. I mean, I think over time, obviously, things didn't quite go as planned. But I would like to believe, because he comes from that generation of politicians that I mentioned, that there is some latent mutual respect. I mean, in a strange way, I went once to the BJP office a few years ago for this Diwali Milan. I was standing at the back. All the journalists are rushing to take selfies with me. He looks at me, Arey Rajdeep, tum kab aaye America se? I had gone to America to do some stories, I think Trump versus Clinton 2016. And he seemed to know that I had come back from America. So I guess Mr. Modi knows that Rajdeep is not all that bad. And, he's someone who, I guess, he still follows very closely.
Someone who follows very closely, not all that bad. Why do you think, Mr. Sardesai, on Twitter, you have a lot of trolling? Some people may even say, probably, are you the most hated journalist in the country right now?
This is the second person who's asking me this question. So obviously there is a problem that I have, that I'm the most hated journalist. Look, I may well be for a certain group of people, I guess because I am still in mainstream media. And therefore I'm out there night after night, 5 nights a week. I'm on a sabbatical at the moment, but in that period when I was there, they still see me out there and they wonder what the hell is he doing out there? Why is he still allowed to be on mainstream TV? So I guess that's one reason. And as I said, I think we live in very hyper-polarized times. And in these hyper-polarized times, it's them versus us. So for a large number of people who dominate the Twitter universe, I am them, not us. Someone to be targeted, brought down. I mentioned in my book that Amit Malviya, the BJP's IT cell chief, sent me WhatsApp messages saying I must retire and I will take you down. That's the reality that I have to live with. I guess, that there's a certain coarseness that has crept into our public life and politics. And I don't want to sound as if I'm a victim of it, but I'm part of this universe. And, that's the way, if you can't stand the heat in the kitchen, come out of it. But while you're in it, I accept it, whether it's hate or whether it's just, the way the world is. I hate to use the word hate.
Right.
I have no hate towards these trolls. I feel a little disappointed when people with whom I've had decent relationships also join sometimes these troll armies. And that is...
like whom?
No, I'm not going to name names. But there are people I've worked with. And
you mean like former journalists?
They could be former journalists. They could be people I've known. And if on Twitter, you can say what you want about someone and get away with it. And that's disappointing because I think, some use anonymity as a cloak. But too much Twitter is injurious to health.
Too much Twitter is injurious to health.
I'm statutory warning.
Statutory warning. I'm going to now shift gears to the book.
Yes, please.
You have the word surprise, right, in the title. Who do you think the 2024 results surprised? Was it political parties or the Janta? What was the surprising factor there? Everyone.
I think, quite remarkably, this election, if you asked anyone in the month of Jan-Feb, particularly after the Ram Mandir inauguration, election was a done deal. Aayega to Modi hi. And not just aayega to Modi hi, but Mr. Modi is going to sweep the elections. An inevitability, an invincibility about Mr. Modi and the BJP. And they could even cross 400. Pollsters were saying it, pundits were saying it, reporters were saying it, political parties were saying it, even the opposition was saying it. I mentioned in my book, there was an opposition leader who threw his hands up and said, I don't want to contest this election. We're going to be swept out. So I don't think I've ever seen that in any previous election in this country of this level, of a certain inevitability of outcome. Then to have an election result, which eventually means the BJP doesn't get a majority on its own. Yes, Mr. Modi becomes Prime Minister, but clearly to some extent huffing and puffing. If Nitish Kumar had stayed with the India Alliance and Mr. Pandian had not been projected by Naveen Patnaik, this could have been a very different election. So I think that's the surprise, that even in such a mahal, where all roads led to Mr. Modi and the BJP, how is it that the BJP didn't get a majority, where there was no level playing field? One of the important points I make in this book is, and I think that's a central part, is we do not have a level playing field in elections. And I trace it back to money power, media power, enforcement agency power. But that's the reality of this country as well. So I think the election surprised all of us and in some cases pleasantly surprised, because I think it gave people a sense of reassurance that, look, don't take the voter for granted. And I think the voter therefore was pleasantly surprised also, at least a section of them, and ironically a section of the media also. Because the media also felt, yaar, chalo, kam se kam thodi to rahat mil gayi, we won't have a domineering one-party government, because you want competition in a democracy. So we were all surprised, some pleasantly, some not so pleasantly.
And why do you think that happened? Do you think it was a strategy from the opposition, etc., that paid off? Or do you think it was just the electorate? You have a woman voter on the cover of your book. Was it the electorate that just responded to changing circumstances?
Yeah, I think it's a combination, Mehak, of various things. I think the government was overconfident, bordering on complacency. They also got carried away with this surround sound of Modi ki guarantee, aayega to Modi hi. And sometimes it can almost become a self-fulfilling way of practicing your politics. Ye aana to hame hi hai. So you forget some of the basics that brought you there. And I think the BJP suffered because of this. The million mutinies, as I call them in Uttar Pradesh, the way in which MPs, the way in which leaders were given tickets, candidates were given tickets, not consulting local units or disregarding the opinion of a chief minister like Yogi Adityanath. All of this cost the BJP in UP. The other place where it cost them was Maharashtra, the manner in which you brought in an Ajit Pawar without really, the same Ajit Pawar whom you called corrupt just a few months ago or a year ago. All of this seemed to weigh against the BJP in some crucial states. And I think the BJP therefore paid a price for overconfidence, complacency, this Sam, Dam, Danda, Bhed politics. The opposition, I mean, you could argue that Rahul Gandhi got his narrative right for once with Samvidhan Khatre Mein Hai. But either way, I think it was more by default. It wasn't as if the opposition did something spectacular to get where it did. And remember, the Congress still got 99 seats and the BJP 240. We sometimes forget that. So the BJP is still more than twice that of the Congress. But yes, Rahul Gandhi showed some fighting spirit, no doubt. I mean, he was out there. I think post Bharat Jodo Yatra had acquired a certain tenacity and an image of a marathon man. But it's a combination of various factors. An opposition which was desperate to survive, forget about revive, just survive. And a BJP that got complacent and overconfident. And therefore, the voter eventually showed what I call the diversity dividend. This is the most diverse country in the world. So a voter in Tamil Nadu will vote very differently, possibly to a voter in Karnataka, who will vote differently to a voter in Bengal, who will vote differently to a voter in Chhattisgarh. These are all, India's diversity dividend, I think, stood out. It meant that no one party, one leader could dominate an Indian election.
Let's talk very quickly about alliances. What we saw in 2024, pre-poll, and of course alliances after the verdict coming in. Tell us a little bit about how this has moved, because earlier in UPA 2, etc., we saw, everybody thought before 2014 that coalitions, alliances are the way to go. Some may argue, even in opposition, that it is better for democracy. Some say, no, we need decisiveness and one-party system. 2024 threw up that differentiator. How do you see alliances going forward?
Look, I think India is a coalition. To my mind, coalitions based on certain common minimum programs can be an effective way of governing this country. Coalitions where the leading party is completely dependent on the coalition partners are dangerous, as we saw in the late 1990s in the United Front government, for example, because then they were constantly worried about just surviving. Because any ally could pull you down and bring down your government.
Right.
So I think coalition governments, only when they are cohesive and have a common minimum program, are effective. The fact is the BJP is by far the dominant party of this coalition. It has 240 members. That makes it a little easier for them to sort of set the rules of governance and set the terms of governance. It also means, in a good way, that whoever is in power also has to take allies along with them. And not just allies, but at times even consult the opposition. The very fact that the Waqf Board bill, or indeed One Nation, One Election, are going to joint select committees of parliament is a good sign. It's a sign that you need some element of consensus and consultation before you go in with sort of disruptive legislation. So I think coalitions, by their very nature, as long as they are built cohesively, are a very effective way of governing India. I actually have a big problem at times with huge majority governments in this country. And we've seen this with Rajiv Gandhi's government in 1984 and to some extent with Modi's government in 2019. They took the opposition for granted, reduced parliament at times to a notice board, and thought that they could just run roughshod over the opposition and thereby made mistakes. And therefore, I would say an ideal situation is a cohesive coalition run by one strong party and a lot of other parties coming together around them on a common minimum program.
Okay, so not ideologically on the same side, but common minimum program to drive that coalition.
Yeah, because look, you contrast today the NDA alliance with the India alliance. The India alliance, I believe, fundamentally was formed only to somehow counter Mr. Modi. But there is no glue that really binds them together, because you had Delhi elections, Lok Sabha, where Aam Aadmi Party and Congress were together. Now you've got another election in Delhi and they're at loggerheads.
Right.
Now that doesn't work. It registers with the voter also. The voter also realizes then that these are very transitional marriages of convenience.
Right.
You need some element of, you need a, if not an ideological glue, some kind of a bonding that goes beyond just immediate gains. If you can do that, then I think coalition governments in India have shown that they can be successful.
Let's talk a little bit about the long-term political trajectory of the country, what you've seen in 2024 and beyond. If you had to hazard a guess, what does the political landscape, say maybe of the next 5 years, I won't say 10, but 5 years look like?
You know, India is a strange country where even 24 hours can be a long time in politics. I still remember, I write it in my book, that I left the office one day in 2019 thinking that Uddhav Thackeray was becoming chief minister. Next morning, 6:30 a.m., I get a phone call saying Devendra Fadnavis is being sworn in. So anything can happen. Having said that, I believe the BJP is the party number one for the next decade. You know, I believe that it remains the principal pole. Let me rephrase that. It remains the principal pole of Indian politics. This doesn't mean that they are invincible or cannot be beaten. As we've seen, they can be defeated, both at the state and the national level. While we focus on Haryana and Maharashtra, let's not forget the BJP lost Jharkhand and couldn't really make a breakthrough in Jammu and Kashmir. So out of 4 states, you could argue 2-2. But the BJP is the principal pole of Indian politics. No doubt about it. Hindutva is a very, very powerful ideological push that the BJP has with the voter. There is the rise of the political Hindu, political and cultural Hindu. No doubt about that either. And that will continue for a while. I think the opposition still is struggling for a narrative, which is compelling enough to challenge the rise of the political Hindu. And it's struggling also to throw up a leadership that is truly credible pan-India to question and challenge this political Hindu narrative. Let me be fair to the opposition. It's not easy being an opposition leader in India. Agencies are misused, institutions are misused, the other side has money power, it has media power.
But wouldn't you say it was always like this, depending on who was in power?
Yeah, it was, you could argue that, but with one caveat, that I think it's become more, as I said right through, it's become far more brazen in terms of the use and misuse of agencies or misuse of media power. I think a lot of this has become far more in your face. It's not that it didn't happen before, but in the present milieu, the manner in which it is done is perhaps far more direct. You could argue the Indira Gandhi years, she dismissed state government, she imposed emergency. Of course, she did all that. Since then, this is the next example of it. I think the closest parallel in that sense to Modi's era is the Indira era, where you have a sort of strong imperious leader who virtually puts the opposition in their place. I don't think that's healthy for democracy. So I think, you know, being an opposition leader in this Modi-dominated environment cannot be easy. There is no level playing field, I repeat. There is no level playing field. I mean, IT notices were served on the Congress 1 month before the Election Commission dating back to 1993.
Right.
I mean, you know, they half the time was spent in trying to get their money out of the so-called frozen bank accounts. So I think there are serious problems that being an opposition leader faces in India. But I still believe that despite all of that, the opposition is still not good enough also to take on Mr. Modi. Let's be honest, across the world, most incumbents have lost in 2024.
Right.
You know, Biden, Harris lost, Rishi Sunak lost.
Especially in the developed world.
In the developed world, democracies had more elections this year than any other year. Most of those elections have gone against the incumbent. Mr. Modi survived it. So you, at one level, have to credit him that he was able to arrest the anti-incumbency that exists with other governments across the world. And part of the reason is the opposition was not good enough. Part of the reason is there was no level playing field. Part of the reason is there's the rise of this political Hindu, all of which enabled Mr. Modi to survive despite clear creeping anti-incumbency.
I'm going to talk very quickly about what's happening in other countries in the parallel to what we've seen in 2024.
Sure.
And the backdrop of the US elections, we now have Germany, which is going to go into early elections as well. So just on the backdrop of some of the developed nations that you've spoken about, we have seen the rise of the right in what otherwise were seen more sort of left-leaning countries, more liberal-leaning countries. Why do you think we are seeing this phenomena sort of almost in quite a few countries? I wouldn't say all, especially in the developed world. Or do you think I'm just correlating and causation to very different things?
No, I think there has been a crisis of liberal democracies across the world. Liberalism itself, or the so-called left liberal parties, but liberal parties in general, liberal democratic parties have faced a challenge, particularly in the last 2 decades. And I think post the sort of global financial crisis of 2008, and a sense of a feeling that that old-style left-wing politics was not being able to address some of the concerns of that many people at the bottom of the pyramid had, those who felt left out. And they began to find various reasons to explain their sense of disempowerment almost. So you have that and that results in the rise of some kind of a populist nationalism, where people say, I'm the strongman leader who's going to fix this broken economic order, political and economic order. And across the world in the last decade, we've seen several leaders, whether it's an Erdogan in Turkey, whether it's Modi in India, whether it's Trump, who's even more maverick, not just a strongman in America, leaders who are coming to power promising to make your country strong and great again after a period of economic decline, and I wouldn't say deprivation, but decline, accentuated perhaps even by COVID, where incomes, people were struggling to retain incomes and jobs. So I think the overall economic decline in the last 20 years and the failure of liberal democratic parties to address some of those concerns have seen a general shift in the gravity of politics to the right. It doesn't mean the right has the answers to all the economic questions. In India, and particularly the right, I find is more the religious right that has risen, not so much an economic right. It's not as if these governments are promising to dismantle government and bring in good governance. There is still the overweening influence of the state. But I think in general, there's a sense that we need anti-establishment strongmen who are going to challenge the old elites, whether it's the Washington elite or the Lutyens elite here, and build a sort of new heaven into which we will all be taken. Now, whether that new heaven, whether it's Viksit Bharat here or make America great again in the US is actually going to happen is a big question mark. And how do you build that at times? By demonizing the other. I think one of the features of politics also in the last 10, 20 years has been demonizing the other. So Trump may well demonize Haitian refugees or those who are coming from across the border, calling them illegal immigrants. We call them Ghuspetia. And most of them are Muslims. I mean, the demonization of the Muslims, the demonization of the immigrants in America, all of this is part of this concerted effort to build this kind of nationalism, this nationalist feeling, which is seen which at the core of it has these populist strongmen claiming to be our saviors.
How do you see the role of the media in this? We had the US elections where Mr. Trump chose to speak to more YouTubers than sort of, the legacy media. How do you see this evolve? What is the role of the media in this as we go along?
It's taken you 50 or 60 minutes to ask the question, which is the elephant in the room. It is really the elephant in the room, Mehak, because look, I've been part of the legacy media for years, and I have absolutely no hesitation in saying I've been proud to be part of that media. We have a great media tradition in this country. But I do think what has happened over the years is partly because of the business model coming under strain, but also because I think there is a general challenge of conscience as to why we became journalists, that whoever is in power is using their state power to somehow or the other either stifle or suppress media voices of dissent. And therefore, the media itself almost becomes at times a cheerleader and an accomplice to whoever is in power. It happens in Delhi with the center. It happens in state governments with whoever is powerful enough. Anyone who challenges the sort of the government in power or questions them is immediately either targeted or in some way ostracized. And thereby the media itself, the legacy media in itself, because of the business model and because they find themselves under this constant pressure, often succumb. And new media, while it may sort of be seen as a place where you can listen to alternative plural voices, still doesn't have a solid revenue model in place to be sustainable as an institution. So you've got a crazy situation in a way where the media, managing the media is now a full-time profession of whoever is in power. And many of us in the media have allowed ourselves to be managed. And that's troubling, because then the legacy media's original role, or the media's original role of telling truth to power, just doesn't seem to be happening. Instead of telling truth to power, we are aligning ourselves with whoever is in power.
You mentioned in your book, you've written about that day when you got a phone call from somebody in the Home Ministry to leave because you were going to get arrested during the farmers' protest for the coverage, etc. that happened. And you said you had never imagined that something like this could happen, that you would have to leave home, all of that. My question to you is, did you, in retrospect, if you've gone over that, did you think you could have done things differently?
I made a mistake during a live report that while I was there at that farmers' protest, I reported about a farmer whose family and friends claimed that he had been shot dead by a police bullet. It's a live situation. In a live situation, I use the word allegedly, but not good enough. The fact that it was there in a live situation naturally made me vulnerable to having spread what turned out to be perhaps the wrong information. So mea culpa, I plead guilty to that. But was it sedition? Surely not. I mean, the nature of the punishment must fit the crime, and in that case, it clearly didn't. I think I think if you do something which is malified, malicious, deliberately spread disinformation, misinformation, please throw the rule book at me. But if you make an honest mistake, if you do something which you regret, why should you be, vilified in this manner? So I felt a bit hounded, I must confess. And it took me a while to recover from that, because, I suddenly knew who my friends were and who were not. And then I realized, and I mentioned this in the book, that I felt sorry for myself. And then I met Disha Ravi, a climate change activist who was put in prison for a week. Delhi police goes to Bengaluru, picks her up for what? She's part of some toolkit, a 20-something girl who's just forwarding a message sent by Greta Thunberg. I mean, surely that didn't deserve sedition and putting her in jail. And then I felt, if this happened to who am I? Look at what's happened to news organizations in this country, whether it's a small organization like NewsClick or a large organization like NDTV. I mean, all of this should worry us. That, why should a Probir Purkayast of NewsClick spend 8 months in jail under some anti-terror provision? He's not a terrorist. And ironically, he's the same person who was jailed in the emergency by Indira Gandhi as well. He was a card-carrying CPM member. Why should a Prannoy Roy be stopped from leaving the country when he's going to celebrate his wife's birthday and be put on some kind of no-fly list or most wanted, whatever you want to call it, no-fly list, and not allowed to leave the country, or a lookout notice for him? I mean, ridiculous. I mean, these are the things that I think bring down our reputation globally as a country that values press freedom. I mean, why should a Dainik Bhaskar have raids conducted on it just within days of exposing how floating bodies were found in the Ganga during COVID? I mean, why should the BBC suddenly find itself under tax scrutiny only after it brings out a documentary on the 2002 riots? Who's going to ask these questions? And asking these questions, I think, is justified, is valid. And we must continue to ask those questions. Asking questions is not anti-national. Journalists asking questions in this country should not be treated as an anti-national act, but as a service you do. If I ask, for example, Mehak, how many people died during COVID? Government says 4.5 lakhs. WHO says 40 lakhs. What's the truth? Am I not to ask that question? I mean, these seem extremely varying figures. I mean, where did the money go for PM Cares Fund? How was it used? Who gave the money? Am I not supposed to, entitled as a taxpayer to ask those questions? So I think a lot of questioning in this country is now being criminalized. Investigative journalism is criminalized. And that's where I have a problem.
My last question to you, your favorite journalist and your favorite politician?
Favorite journalist is a tough one. I can't think of someone who, I sort of will stand out and say, this I don't think he's quite a journalist, or he would like to call himself, but I was very privileged when I started this profession of sitting in the cabin next to R.K. Lakshman at the Times of India. Lakshman liked to call himself a newsman or a journalist, not just a cartoonist, but he had this acute sense of observation and communication, and I learned a lot from him, from just watching him at work. There have been journalists across the world. John Pilger wrote some great books, which were really searing and almost inspiring in the way in which he sort of put out hard-hitting facts. I was a great fan. I guess I entered journalism in that. I started following news after all the President's Men and Bob Woodward and Bernstein and Watergate. So for an entire generation or two, Watergate was seen as what journalism can do. But I also admired the likes of Inder Malhotra and others, who doggedly used to do their political commentary, just doggedly write their political commentary. And there is something reassuring about that. I remember Shamlal, the great editor of Times of India, who would put these, who would write these life and letters looking into the world of books. I was very privileged as a young man to have good mentors, Dilip Padgaonkar, Daryl De Monte at Times of India, Radhika Roy, Pranoy Roy at NDTV. I worked with a very fine team at Network 18. So you were part of that. So, we were very privileged. I've been very lucky to work with a group like India Today, which, Arun Puri set up, a truly remarkable institution. Fact is that they've given me space at 9 p.m. All credit to Kalipuri for giving Rajdeep Sardesai in this milieu the kind of space that I have. So so that's the journalist question. Favorite politician? That's a tough one. Also in journalists, you could rattle off, before I enter politicians, many more names. Shekhar Gupta was a sort of editor-reporter that reporter-editor, the kind that I wanted to, in a way, aspire to be, that, you're not just an editor, but also a reporter on the field. So we can go on with lots of names. But, journalists are not, I know more than politicians is an interesting one. I don't think, when I was starting off, Bal Thackeray was a larger-than-life figure in Mumbai at the time. So interviewing Bal Thackeray was always a challenge and an opportunity. And he and I struck some kind of a strange love-hate relationship, if you want to call it that. He would criticize me in public and then invite me to have warm beer with him at home. So that was quite an experience. But I also learned, every time I say Lalu Prasad is among my favorite politicians, I get into trouble because then I'm again trolled for saying that. But, in his time, he was a remarkable politician. He broke the monopoly of the upper caste over politics in Bihar. He may have eventually squandered the opportunities that he was given, but just in terms of being this sort of political revolutionary, almost to change the way Bihar's politics and North India's politics was practiced, is quite rare. But out of all the politicians I have met, the one I sort of looked up to and said, wow, was Nelson Mandela. I remember meeting him in the early 90s when he had just come out of prison. There was a cricket tour going on in South Africa. And, he didn't seem to have any of the anger or bitterness of someone who had just spent 30 odd years in jail towards those who had imprisoned him. And I thought that's the closest I've come to seeing someone who may have had what Mahatma Gandhi had, which is compassion and this ability to rise above these bitterness and rivalries. These are some of the politicians who stand out. I wish I could also put Mr. Modi in my list of favorite politicians. Maybe I should, given that we've had this common trajectory of sort of following each other in a way over 30 years. So I guess Mr. Modi will also somewhere be on the list. He may not invite me to dinner, but he's someone I've followed closely. And you've got to admire anyone in politics who's been around for so long. But there are many politicians I admire across the board. I've seen them go through good times and bad and stay around. They never give up. Sharad Pawar has just suffered a big election defeat, and yet he was having a birthday party the other day. He's 84, and he seemed to be smiling. I would be depressed and sort of, if I suffered a big election defeat or something, I'd sort of close myself in a room. He doesn't. There's Mamta Banerjee, who's battled it out for 30 years, took on the left and survived. Only woman chief minister. there are all kinds of politicians who surprise you. I mean, Naveen Patnaik, I never thought that he would be one of India's longest serving chief ministers, but he became one.
Yeah, I asked you for one, but you've given us a list.
Yeah, no, because my worry
you
about
hedged your bets.
I've hedged my bets. I thought, if I put Narendra Modi there, I'm trying to think. I didn't mention a single Congress leader. I mean, I wonder what that says. This was
without disclaimers.
That's right. I wonder why I did, because there's no, I guess over the last 30 years there've been. The rise of the BJP is the story of the last 30 years. There's no doubt. When I entered this profession in '88. BJP was seen as a marginal fringe force. Today, it is party number one. I admire a lot of the left leaders who've lived very austere lives and committed. Sitaram Yechuri, who passed away, committed year after year through struggles. They may not be big leaders in terms of winning elections and votes, but apna party ka kaam karte the. They are not going to defect simply because they are out of power. My problem with new age politicians is they ukta suraj ke saath jate hain. Wherever there's the rising sun, they will go with that. I think it's important to have politicians who are willing to stay the course, irrespective of victory and defeat, and stay true to your ideology or what you believe in. And there are all too few now like that. But some of the old left represent, some of the old right, Mr. Vajpayee, some of my best interviews I've done, I think, is with Atalji. Only problem was I didn't know when he was pausing, jab wo pause karte the, whether he's going to speak more.
Oh, you can ask your next question.
Yeah, and just as I was about to ask, he would continue. But I did an interview with him in 2004 April, and I believe that was really, it was just a day after this sari stampede in which women had died. But he spoke beautifully. He was quite Advani ji also. As you can see, I'm naming more BJP leaders than Congress leaders when I think of leaders who have really impressed me as political figures over the years.
I know that was supposed to be my last question, but you've led me to this one. On the Sonia Gandhi interview, because, and I know it's come up in many conversations, you just said, you interviewed Mr. Vajpayee after a stampede which had taken place, and you were able to ask the tough, difficult questions. What happened with the Sonia Gandhi interview, which to date comes back? And I know in this profession of 30 years, sometimes you're allowed to ask questions, sometimes you're not. What really went out there?
No, I'll tell you. You see, two things. First, people don't know that I interviewed Mrs. Gandhi in 2005 December, soon after CNN-IBN was formed. I asked for an interview, I got one, and we asked all questions to her about dynasty, about, who was the remote control in that government. All those questions were asked in 2005 December. Nobody talks about that. But people talk about 2016 November, I think, whenever I had that interview.
Maybe because social media
because social media was there. Also the fact that the background and the context was not given. This was an interview which she was agreed to give after much difficulty on the occasion of the centenary of Indira Gandhi. 100 years, it was in Allahabad. They were celebrating Mrs. Gandhi's 100 years. Centenary celebrations had begun. Her assistants told me, look, she will not take any political questions. I thought, let's get the interview and I'll slip in the questions. So obviously you start first by asking some sweet questions on Indira Gandhi, and then every time I would ask her, but now let's talk politics, ma'am. Will Rahul Gandhi succeed you? No, that is a political question. So the moment I tried to ask a political question, she said no. To be fair, that's what her assistants had said. Maybe I should have turned around and said, look, if she's not going to answer a political question, I'm not doing the interview. But the truth of the matter is no journalist is going to say no to a Sonia Gandhi interview. This is the reality that I keep telling people. And this is the problem with a lot of our leaders who you can never otherwise get access to. And therefore that interview eventually ended up about, Sonia Gandhi's relationship with Indira Gandhi, including the food. What were the dishes that Sonia Gandhi learned from Indira Gandhi. So I guess there will be those who troll me on it, and they are perfectly justified in doing so. But they must understand the context, that I would have loved to ask all the questions that I could on politics, but I couldn't. People don't know that when I was at CNN-IBN, we broke the big story, our exclusive investigation of how Ottavio Quattrocchi's accounts were being defrozen. It resulted in Parliament, a bedlam in Parliament. Now, how many people would do a story on Quattrocchi, who is considered so close to Sonia Gandhi, when she's in power? So, after you've done 35 years in journalism, people should judge you on the entirety of what you've done. Ye interview, wo interview, ye kyun pucha, wo kyun pucha. I mean, that can't be the basis of sort of either sort of targeting you or lionizing you. I don't want any of that. Judge a person. You make mistakes. You do some, you do some things well, some things not. Chalta rehta hai, I would still be happy to get an interview with both Mr. Modi and Rahul Gandhi. I'd love to do a debate with both of them. Every time I watched Kamala Harris versus Narendra Modi Kamala Harris versus Donald Trump in the US presidential elections, I thought, what an idea if we could all get, if we could get Narendra Modi and Rahul Gandhi together in a public debate. I know we are not a presidential system, but I remember I almost once succeeded in getting Sheila Dikshit and Arvind Kejriwal in a face-off in 2013. They had both almost agreed. I mean, Kejriwal was, of course, more than happy to do it at that time, but Sheila ji backed out. She was quite an admirable politician. In many ways, I admire Sheila Dikshit for being from where she had. She really was someone who, in her own way, in her own quiet way, was able to get Delhi to, make Delhi a better place.
So that's the one Congress minister that you
That's the one Congress person but I'd love to do a debate. I'd love to do a debate between Mr. Modi and Rahul Gandhi. We can even have two anchors, Arnab Goswami and me, both. Let's have both, two of us here sitting and Mr. Modi and Rahul Gandhi there. That would make, I think it would make good television. It would break the internet.
It would break the internet. On that note, Rajdeep Sardesai, thank you so much for speaking to Brut.
Mehak Kaspeka, thank you very much for having me, and thank you to the team at Brut. You have a lovely office.
Thank you.